Hello and welcome to the Gentleman Project Podcast. I'm Corey Moore.
And I'm Kirk Chugg. We do have to apologize because we haven't been publishing regularly as we have been for the last couple of years, but it was for good reason.
Spring break.
Spring break. I took my family on vacation. Corey took his family on vacation. And we thought, you know what? For a family-centered podcast, it's all right that we take a couple of weeks off. So we did. Thanks for joining us again. We'll publish this as soon as we possibly can because we know that there's a lot of people that look forward to the podcast. And thanks for your patience on that. Figured it was probably kind of silly if we, interrupted our family vacations to do a podcast. So
happened to go on vacation at the same time. That was the problem.
But
we couldn't even have
that's good,
guest people.
That's good because you were in sync.
So you just heard our guest, and he's got a way cooler voice than Corey or I do. This is Ross McGarvey. He is one of our friends here in Salt Lake City that I've known for probably 6 to 8 years.
Yeah.
And he's just always been one of those guys that he's always doing something interesting. He's always interesting to talk to. He's got a great family, and I watch him on social media, and he's very purposeful in what he does and what he teaches his kids. So we'll talk to Ross a little bit about that today and see what he's doing as a father to be purposeful and intentional. And hopefully you'll get something out of that today. So Ross, welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be here. It's I think we're birds of a feather when it comes to that purposeful intention with our kids.
That's exactly why I wanted you to be on the podcast. Tell us first about your family and your kids and where you're from and your family dynamic.
So, father of two. So I'm obviously not from here, originally from Scotland. Wife is from here. We met online way back in the day before it was socially acceptable to admit that you met on the internet. So
you never admit,
or actually the norm.
Now it is.
Now it's the norm.
Well, it was. There were no apps. It wasn't like swipe left, swipe right.
Yeah.
So
there were barely phones, probably, if you're as old as I am. I don't know, but
hey, my first device was a pager.
Yeah.
There you go.
That says everything we need to know.
So, yep. So we dated long distance. I lost the coin toss. I leave the beautiful green country of Scotland to come to the mile-high desert of Salt Lake. It's an adjustment, to say the least.
Comparatively, that is so true.
Yeah, no, it really is. I'm just like, why? I thought I was in shape. I am so not in shape.
This elevation.
My wife's like, yeah, mile above sea level. I'm like, oh, does that make a difference?
That's awesome.
Yes, it does. So we have two boys. We have a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old. Rory and Pierce. We tried to keep the names
Very Scottish.
So I'm an entrepreneur. I own a marketing agency. I've got some other business interests here and there. My wife, she also works full time. So she's the president of her business down in South Jordan. And so, you talk about family dynamic, two parents working. We've had a lot of conversations about how do we stay intentional? How do we not nickel and dime the kids? It's been a challenge.
That's not easy.
No, it's really not. And I can admit I can be a workaholic, but I mean, again, it works for us. It doesn't work for everyone. But, our typical routine is I get up just before 5. That's my time. Nobody's awake. I'll try and get to the gym, failing miserably. And then I actually get the boys ready for school. So 7 o'clock rolls around. We'll get them up. I'll get them fed, dressed, drop them off, head into the office. And then we have a nanny that will pick them up, but then my wife comes home and she kind of takes care of things. And we kind of try and tag team it as much as possible. Years ago, my wife introduced me to the 5 love languages.
Yeah, it's a great one.
And it was such an interesting way to think about needs from a relationship. And one of mine is quality time. It's not quantity of time, it's quality time.
Yeah.
And so when the kids showed up, it was interesting just to it kind of worked, because I know when I walk in the house, if I'm not on a call, I'm dad. I make the dinner, we're going to shoot some hoops, I'm going to try and be present for as long as possible. And I don't know, my kids are young. Maybe as teenagers, they'd be like, Dad, you suck, but it's kind of my way of saying, hey, when it's time for me to be home, I want to be present. Hopefully, hopefully that works out okay for them. And my wife has a lot of flexibility with her position where she can work from home. And so she's around the house a lot more than I am.
Right.
But, you know, again, it's not for everyone. My wife and I met when, you know, I was 29 when we get married, almost 30. She was 31, almost 32. And for us, you know, I always said, look, if you want to, when the kids show up, if you want to stay home, you're more than welcome to, you know, but to be 10 years into a career, she's like, I've spent, you know, a decade kind of getting to where I am. And it's a learning curve, you know, it really is a learning curve. And I think just being here in Utah, it can be you work, you don't stay home, but every marriage is different. Every household is different. So
do you have anything that you're talking to your boys about right now that you'd say, this is working for us right now? Do you have any dialogue or lingo or vocabulary that you use with your boys to try to teach them how to be good people and to pass on some of the things that you think are important?
Yeah. So my dad was a gym teacher, and so I've got that voice in my head. So a little bit of background. So my eldest son, he had very delayed speech to the point where we were getting concerned, and it was babble when it was coming out. He thought he was having a conversation with you, and you're like, I have no clue what you said. And so we went and had him, a specialist look at him. They ran their tests, and they're like, he's got special needs. Now, my parents were both teachers, you know, even though my dad was a gym teacher, he worked in special education the last portion of his career. And I'm like, I don't know. I said, look, I don't agree with you. I don't believe that one 45-minute session with my son writes his story for the rest of his life. Mm-hmm. And of course, my wife is like, you need to relax. And I'm like, you know, and I get it. It's a very hard thing for a parent to hear.
Sure.
You know, but I'm stubborn. And I also feel like I know my kid. And I've been around enough special needs and learning difficulties that I felt like maybe we should go and get things checked out. I said, you didn't ask about our medical backgrounds. You didn't ask anything about our health. Well, it turns out he actually had a thing called glue ear. So he can only hear at 50%. Everything sounded like it was underwater. So in his mind, when he was speaking to us, he was repeating words the way he heard them.
Wow.
So that's the babble. And literally it was one operation, 30 days later, 100% improvement.
Wow.
Just crazy. But he was still behind. So there was a lot of work that kind of get put in.
So how old was he when you figured this out?
He would have been 4.
Okay.
So he was eligible to go to kind of special kindergarten and just preschool and kind of help get caught up. And we elected to send him to, we were concerned that if we sent him to public school, he'd get lost in the 30 plus students. And so we sent him to a private school where the class size is 15, just so he could have a little bit more one-on-one time.
Sure.
My eldest he is a gem. Like, he is the most considerate, aware, lovely kid. He's a big kid. I mean, he wears like 12-year-old clothes and he's 9. But he is the walking definition of a gentle giant. His teacher spoke to us 2 years ago, year and a half ago, and said you should maybe consider getting him tested for dyslexia. Just there's certain word jumbles that are coming out and that may not be related to his to some of his speech stuff. He wasn't confident. He was shying away from certain things, and sure enough, you know, he got diagnosed with dyslexia. And, you know, I'm sure maybe when he's older, he'll hear this. We've never used the dyslexia word with him, ever. And we won't for a little bit more, you know, probably for another year.
So he doesn't know that he has dyslexia.
I think this is smart. Keep telling us why, though.
Because there's a label and there's a stigma and there's a limitation.
Mm-hmm. Self-limiting belief.
Absolutely. And my wife, it's so funny. She and I, like, independently, we're just kind of on the same wavelength with certain things. So this is probably 2016, 2017. I printed a bunch of t-shirts that said, I am on it. Just I am. You get to choose the next word. You know, it's because there's so much you are, no, I am. And I come home one day and my wife has a sticker on her mirror in her bathroom. It says, "I am enough."
Huh. And independently from you making these t-shirts.
Completely independently. Because she's like, I want our kids to see that every day when they're brushing their teeth. And so when it came to dyslexia, I wasn't ready to say, hey, here's this badge. You have to wear this badge, and it becomes a reason why you can't.
Yeah.
It becomes a crutch. And so we said, hey, Rory, guess what? We just found out, did you know there's 2 ways to read? We found out we've been teaching you the wrong way how to read.
Huh. I love this.
Like, it's not how your brain works, man. Like, it's on us. So here's what we're going to do. You're going to start meeting with and we were so fortunate. His teacher actually just qualified with a certification in dyslexia. And so she was a qualified tutor. So it was somebody he knew. It was somebody that was familiar, and it was at his school. So
that's awesome.
During the summer, he went 3 days a week and he did 90 minutes of tutoring. And then during the school year, started out three days a week. He is totally oblivious. He's like, oh, I read the other way, but I'm almost caught up.
That's great.
What a different mindset of like, I'm almost there, and he's busy. So he has school. He's made so much progress. He only has tutoring twice a week, but that's still an extra 3 hours every week. He plays basketball on a team. So he's got games, and he was training twice a week. He's at a place now that his teachers are saying, yep, he can go into 4th grade. He'll be totally fine. He is not our worst reader. Let's just have him, come once or twice a week during the summer, and he'll be exactly where he needs to be.
That is fantastic. That's a huge win.
It's a huge win, but it's just about framing.
Yeah.
When I take the kids to school, even when I take the neighbours' kids to school and drop them off, I ask them one question, and they're not allowed to leave the car until they shout the answer, which is, what day is it? Best day ever.
Love that.
Like, they shout that. And every neighbourhood kid that is in my car that's getting dropped off knows that, and they scream it to the point where the teachers at drop off are like, what on earth? I love it. So we're really, like, positive self-talk is huge. There are no limitations. There's not reasons why you can't. There's reasons for you to grow. There's moments to learn and to be an example, right? Because there's kids that they beat themselves up. And so for us, it's that positive energy without trying to be a cheerleader, but just this quiet determination. One of the phrases is, we can do hard things.
Love it.
It's
printed on my wall in my house.
Is it?
It's been our family motto for last 15 years.
Wasn't that the very first, the Gentleman Project lesson?
The very first lesson I taught my boys in the Gentleman Project is, a gentleman does hard things without complaining.
Mm-hmm. And it's because these are life skills, these are principles, and I think that I like to think of myself as fairly up to speed with technology and how the world is, but it's not always going to be that way. So I'm not going to be there to help them navigate and, the more challenging areas of life. But if you treat them good, if you teach them good principles, if you teach them, hey, we can do hard things, they become self-reliance, and it's not about pass and fail all the time. That is define who you are. Did you work hard? Because if you worked hard and it wasn't the outcome you'd hoped for, guess what? You can take that hard work onto the next thing and onto the next thing and onto the next thing. So yeah, that's kind of the big focus in our house.
That's great.
So
that's great. The vocabulary. Do you ever use the word gentleman in your house?
Oh, constantly.
Really?
Is that what a gentleman does? We are trying to be gentlemen. My dad passed away 14 years ago, but he was a gentleman. He always, even as a drilly or a gym teacher, always had
a drilly.
A drilly. That was the.
I love that.
That's the old school Scottish name for a gym teacher. He always wore a collared shirt, so golf shirt, polo shirt, sweater over the top. Because he didn't want. He's like, I'm going to try and dress my best, and he got that from his dad, who drove an oil tanker, but wore a collared shirt and tie every day under his overalls. And pressed it because you took care of what you had. And so mannerly, so polite. And so he, you know, I reference him often. Your grandpa was a gentleman. He said, please. He said, thank you. He held the doors open. And when they're maybe getting a little bit unruly, rowdy's fine, right? Because boys are going to be boys. But when things are getting pushed, I'm like, are we being gentlemen right now?
And how do they react to that?
Oh no, I mean they fade. The eyes look down and they're like, no, you know,
Without you yelling at them.
don't need
You
to shout.
just have to ask the question.
Yeah.
So you're framing it that reference of this is what we want to be. This is the magic of this word.
Yep.
And the whole reason why my boys called this the Gentleman Project was that word has some magic to it.
It does, and we run away from it as a society. We're not embracing that. You know, I'm okay with the formality that is associated with it because it's structure and it's discipline and it's mannerly and it's a little bit of refinement, not in the fancy sense of it.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like, hey, probably not appropriate right now. You know, there's a time and a place, and yeah, they understand what that means.
Well, I think part of being a gentleman is being situationally aware of what's going on around you.
Yeah.
And I have these conversations with people all the time, and they're frustrated with their job or something, and the management is just tone deaf. Well, the management is not aware of what's going on around them. And so when they hear complaints, they're just like, oh, no, I don't think that's going on. Not in my workplace.
They lack context because they're not paying attention.
Right. Just to be situationally aware in every situation, what's going on, and acting appropriately, responding appropriately, I think makes or breaks a gentleman.
I agree. It's
or a lady.
How do you know to hold open a door if you're not paying attention?
Yeah, that's a good
How,
point.
how do you know how to pick someone up when they fall if you're self-absorbed? You know, it matters. It's you know, it's okay to look first, speak second.
I think we too, as a society, are always talking about to our youth, to our kids, to each other. You know, what do you want to achieve, or what do you want to do when you grow up? But there's a more important question that you alluded to, and that's what kind of person do you want to? Who do you want to be?
Yep.
More important than what you want to do or what you want to achieve. It's who do you want to be, right? What kind of person? And framing that in I want to be a gentleman, and explaining what that means.
Yep.
And if you're doing those things, yeah, you can achieve lots of great things. And you but the mindset to achieve those are these things like you talked about, right? I can do hard things, and I can be honest, and I can have manners, and I can be kind. I'm going to be that person regardless of what I'm trying to achieve.
And regardless of what my peers are doing, and trying to instill the courage to be different.
Mm-hmm.
You
That's
know,
hard for kids today.
It's so hard. I mean, just it's the access to information and, you know, showing age. When I left school, I just went home and that was it.
Watched
Watched
cartoons.
Yeah. But you know, the bullies or the people that I didn't want to be around, I didn't have to deal with them until the next day. Now, because of technology, they're in your home, they're in your bedroom. There's no break from that white noise of it. So it's really hard to rebuild and to take time and just to breathe and go, okay, that was yesterday, today's today.
Yeah.
You know,
You're a pretty tech savvy guy too. From what I've seen, you stay on top of that type of thing. How do you plan on navigating technology with your boys?
oh, that's a great question. Flip phones.
Flip phones.
That's what I've done.
No, straight up. It's not even and I love technology. I love all of the good that it can bring. My eldest has a Gab watch, so it's secure numbers, and that's more of a convenience for us because it, you know, whilst I may have run wild as a youth, you know, it's like you're all over the neighborhood, you're in the park. I mean, you're just roaming.
Right.
The world is not as nice a place now as it was then, and so yeah, it's a way for them, you know, for him to communicate with me, and it also keeps them together. Hey, Pierce, my young one, you stay with him because he can always call us if something goes on. And we have tablets, but they're on, you know, in the home, but they're on lockdown. But this idea of you can take this into your bedroom and shut the door, it's just not really up for discussion.
Yeah.
You know,
And you're at 9 and
7
right now, right? So the days of when all of the other kids, like I've got a 5th grader who's coming home and saying, hey Dad, all my friends are getting iPhone 13s. I'm like, I don't even have an iPhone 13. That's okay. But I don't even have a phone. I'm like, well, you're in 5th grade. That's okay. I didn't get a cell phone until I was 21.
I would have been 22 when I got my first one.
So it's that there's so much social pressure on these kids. So like, well, everybody's going and they're doing something and I get left out because I don't have a phone. Well, I've got one. You can give them my number. We can make sure that you're included, but there is pressure coming from the kid, from the peer groups, and then from your own kid. And you've got to have the backbone to say, no, that's not how we do things.
You know, our kids play video games, not a ton. You know, we're always like, hey, do we need to take it away? No. Okay. You should self-govern. And friends are like, hey, can we play online together? I'm like, no, we don't do that. Really? And parents are texting, hey, is it cool? I'm like, we just don't do that.
Yeah.
You know, like I played Super Nintendo. Like
it's harmless,
right? It's whatever's going on in the room is what's going on in the room,
right? You know, it wasn't this whole network of people.
Yeah, and it's just, hey, if the longer I can keep my kids in that world of not letting them try, the easier it becomes. The second it becomes, well, that's an exception, and that's an exception, and that's an exception, it starts to undermine the rule. And again, for different people, I mean, everyone has to do what works for them. It's like, hey, just go outside, kick a ball. We have a creek that runs through our neighborhood. Please go fall in. Like, like over the summer, if they don't come home covered in mud, scrapes, and possibly wet, I don't think I've pushed them enough as a father, you know? And I mean that with all sincerity. It's like, no, just go have fun. You should go want to make a fort, you know, and get to know the neighbors. Yeah, let them shout at you from running through their garden. Don't break anything, but just go be kids.
Go be a kid. Have
push the boundaries, you know, and learn your limitations and understand consequence. You know, please don't be dumb to the point of no return, but yeah, you're going to fall. And that's a good thing.
We've got the opportunity here too, because like there's probably some cultural differences between the way you grew up in Scotland and the way that kids are growing up today in the U.S. We've got listeners all over the world, but most of them are in the U.S. So speak to those people how did you grow up? And did you grow up in the outdoors? Like, was that a major thing in Scotland? That you were outside more than you were inside?
Definitely.
Culturally, or is that a family rule that you guys had?
No, I mean, I think it's also of its time, right? You know, there was less to do indoors. So what people find funny is I grew up on terrestrial TV, there were 4 channels.
Yeah.
I remember when the 5th one got introduced, there was no cable, you know, my parents couldn't afford satellite. So, I mean, what was on was on. And if Countdown was on, you're like, this sucks. This is not cartoons. Okay, I'm going to go read a book. You know, if it's raining, you know, so there was definitely some, just the availability of entertainment was definitely limited. But I mean, there was a burn, so it was a creek, you know, it's like kind of, I don't know, quarter of a mile from the house. I lived down there. I mean, I just did, you know, it's like my sense of mischief was like taking my dad's penknife and like sharpening sticks and throwing them at the mud, you know?
Right.
It's like, oh, I got a box of matches. Let's have a fire in the rain. For me, you know, I grew up wearing school uniform. First day of school, shirt, tie, you know, knee-length grey shorts, you know, pull-up socks. I mean, very, very
Scottish.
Traditional. And we didn't have a lot. And uniform is a great equalizer.
Yeah.
In my mind. Doesn't matter how wealthy, how poor, a uniform's a uniform. And so one of the things I liked about the school that we send our kids to is uniform every day. So it's a polo shirt and grey slacks. Everyone's the same. It doesn't make a difference. It also sends a message of there's a distinction and a difference between recreation time and time to learn. And so that was kind of a conscious discussion of that. I can't give them my upbringing, but here's a little taste of. And to try and just get them to go outside, it's just so easy that, I mean, the tablet and the phone and the video game, they are the babysitters of our generation. And that's hard.
Yeah. You said it.
So what are some things that your parents taught you growing up that made you who you are? your mom or dad? And what are some of those things that you're trying to give to your children?
My mum and dad were very different. So, dad's a West of Scotland man's man, once a gym teacher, always a gym teacher. The phrase that pays from my dad was hustle. Not in the sense of the hustle and grind of entrepreneurship. It was, we got to have some urgency. We got to have some energy to this. And he would say hustle and he would clap twice. That was his thing.
Nice.
So having children, have caught myself doing that on more occasions than one would have thought possible. But there is something to urgency, controlled urgency. And trying to teach the kids, and I didn't get it at the time until I was older. He's like, if you just get what you need to do done, the rest of the time's your own.
Yeah.
And whether that, and I think that's true. If we waste so much time messing around that it's like we manifest it into existence. I'm not going to be able to do this because I have to do this. Well, you've just taken 8 times longer to do this one thing. Now you have no time. So a little bit of urgency, a little bit of hustle is definitely something that the boys need to know, especially since we're breeding a generation that's built on lethargy and video games. It's like, get up and go. We can do this. My mum, she was like the spiritual figure in our home. And it was amazing. Yesterday was Mother's Day at my church. I actually spoke on Mother's Day and she watched on Zoom. But she was a big believer in all things were possible. She loved art and she was a teacher as well. So both my parents believed in the younger generation. They really believed that tomorrow, whether you call them leaders or not, but tomorrow's built on the kids of today. And so it was this unshaking, just optimism. And just having been home, my mum has spent time with the kids, and my oldest, he would have just moved in with her. So he spends 3 nights with her. He's like, do I have to come back to America? I was like, you do. Unfortunately, I don't think my mum would be thrilled. I don't think your mum would love it. But she's just got an infectious energy, and it's like, hey, let's paint and let's draw and let's go for a walk. And, it's like,
that's cool. There's
tons of stuff that we can do. And in talking to him afterwards, I said, do you notice any similarities? He's like, you and Gran are really alike. I was like, I get it from her. It's okay to have fun. It's good to laugh. Not one video game was played and not one movie was watched, because there's so much to do. And so I think it's an attitude. It's that optimism. It's that energy. And we're fortunate in a world where there's a lot of mental health struggles. There's a lot of depression. There's a lot of negative self-talk. I have sisters that have contended with that on and off over the years. I'm really fortunate, and I want them to know that happiness can be a state of mind. Happiness is not necessarily the thing you're doing now. And both of my parents were really hard workers. And so my example of them is we work hard, we do hard things. Sometimes it's easier to sit on the couch, and sometimes maybe I do sit on the couch longer than I should, but there's do it willingly. Because you can take it with you. For me, it's not about the finer skills. It's about how are you going to deal with adversity. It's about how are you going to get up and face every single day, good, bad, or indifferent. It's just, those to me, and just maybe I'm projecting my own stuff on them. That's what I believe is going to help them become well-rounded gentlemen. Yeah.
I always tell my kids that happiness is a choice.
Totally.
Because I think 90% of the time it is. Right? You can control your attitude. There's a lot of things you can't control, but your ability to control yourself and your attitude. And the first book the book that kind of influenced me in that direction was Viktor Frankl's, I think it's A Man's Search for Meaning. He was in a concentration camp, and it was great. So are there any books or mentors in your life that have greatly influenced you outside of your parents?
Yeah. So you're going to laugh. This is the most random book to even reference, but when I read it, something clicked in me, and it's the 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss, which is a business book.
Yeah, I've read it.
To me, it was not about working 4 hours. To me, and I feel like a lot of people missed the point of it. If you find something you love, you'll never work a day in your life.
Yeah.
that only a very tiny percentage of your work should feel tedious and like the grind. That's what I took from it. And that's what I try and talk to my kids about. And it's that, and it's the busy versus productive.
Totally.
You know, it's like, oh, I'm so busy. I've got this to do and I'm going this, and everybody's in such a rush. But the series, the checks and balances, how does it net out at the end of the day? Did you move the needle? Did you create an outcome? You know, and I think that's applicable to life. At the end of every day, at the end of every month, when you have a birthday and you reflect on it, did I move the needle? Either for myself or for other people? You know, did I go through the motions of saying I'm helping and serving, and did I check a bunch of boxes, or did I make an impact? You know, such a weird takeaway from that book. But
no, I love that. I don't think we've talked about that on the podcast very much either. This idea of moving the needle and moving forward, and busy doesn't equal results.
Not at all.
There's a lot of leverage out there in other ways that equal results, right? And I think teaching your kids that is huge. You know, explaining to them, and you know, certainly that works in business too.
Yeah,
but just in life in general, right? Whether you're trying to do your homework, in the right way, or you're trying to get good grades, depending on, you know, how you look at it, or you're trying to get better at a sport, or you name it, right? You can just be busy.
Yeah.
A lot of people do that, and they think that's going to equal results, but it doesn't necessarily do that.
Corporate lifestyle, you're just like, we're so busy. I'm like, but so inefficient.
But what in the world are you,
you
accomplishing? Yeah,
you know,
totally.
But we do that, right? Even in dating, like a lot of people date just to pass the time. It's convenient. It's easy. You know, even with, you know, dating our spouses.
Yeah.
Are we ticking the box of going on a date, or are we saying, no, I'm holding some space so that we get something? Is it just a little bit of respite? Is it a smile? You know, is it a hug at the end of a hard day? You know, I mean, I think there's a lot there. The second part of your question is, I had a couple of people who were really, really influential. One was a bishop at my church. He had 4 kids. I'm LDS, you know, we're in like the LDS Mecca. But believe it or not, the church in Scotland is very different to what it is in Utah.
It is.
I was the only young man, you know, in my church, and we didn't have a young men's presidency. We didn't have any like designated leaders because there just weren't any young men, and there weren't very many men to lead.
Right.
And so my bishop became kind of a young men's leader, and he left 4 kids every week to come show up for me. My dad is not LDS. So, you know, when I say my mum was a spiritual leader in the home, my dad was an amazing human being. He was a gentleman. He was considerate. He was kind. He was thoughtful. He knew how to put other people first and he wanted to stay in the background. You know, he helped more people, and I only heard stories after the fact. But I'm just like, man.
Didn't even know my dad did that kind of stuff, huh?
One of his friends from the pub, his dad passed away and he wasn't working. And he took him out and he bought him a white shirt and a tie so he would look good for his dad's funeral. And then he gave him £100 and he said, buy everyone a drink. I don't want anyone knowing where you're at. That seems very inconsequential.
Huge to that guy.
Huge to that guy,
yeah.
You know. But I've had people who've stepped up in so many different ways that have, you know, 4 kids, and he shows up for me, you know, and he showed up for me for years, long after he was not the bishop anymore. And I'm grateful for that, because in a world even back then where it's easy to justify the reasons why not, it's easy to say, I'm just so busy. What does 1 kid matter? I have 4 of my own. Game changer, you know. Like it taught me self-worth, because even when you're young, and I was bullied chronically as a kid. I was short, skinny. Like the me of now is not the me as a teenager.
Gotcha.
I was 5'5" when I was 16. You know, short, skinny. Played D&D. Had really bad undercut. You know, listen to heavy metal. I mean, I'm painting a great picture. I was a late bloomer. And so even in the tough times, there's some self-worth. You know, I served an LDS mission in large part because of him.
And that's a generational game changer.
Yeah, and I was the first missionary at my ward in 20 years.
Oh, wow.
I didn't need to go. There was zero pressure on me to go. But principles, right? Hey, go, grow, learn. Even my dad, he's like, I don't believe in all this stuff, but it won't hurt you.
That's cool. Where did you serve?
In Portugal.
Portugal, okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I've been so blessed to have people in my life at just the right time. But every single one of them pushed me to have a slightly higher purpose. It wasn't about academia. It wasn't about university. I took the hard way. I wasn't a very good student. I had to go to night school when when I came back. But I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't do it any other way. And I am not going to stress about the level of academia that my boys attain if they're good people. Good people doesn't mean lazy.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this conversation is exactly what I needed today. Like, there are so many good lessons in this, and I'm looking forward to going back and listening to it multiple times because I need a little bit more Ross McGarvey in my life. You've got a great attitude, raising your boys, I believe, in the right way for your family. And hopefully some of the things that you talked about today influence somebody listening to the podcast. We hope that's the case. So if you're listening to the podcast and something clicked with you as Ross was speaking, I think he's got a lot of great wisdom in raising productive, well-rounded gentlemen.
That's the hope. Being a parent is hard. There is no magic formula.
No. Yeah. And you have good days and you have bad days, and you feel like a failure some days and you feel like a champion others. And it's on the days that you feel like a failure, and hopefully you can listen to a podcast and go, I got this. Every day's a new day.
We can do hard things.
We can do hard things. Yeah. I love it. Well, at the end of every podcast, Ross, we always ask our guests what they think it means to be a gentleman. We've discussed it a little bit today, but if you were to define it, how would you do that?
There's a lot to that, but to simplify it down, it's establish a moral compass, understand the difference between right and wrong, and don't be afraid to pursue the path of right. It's okay not to blend in to the masses. Be courteous, be aware. Be aware. The biggest trap is ignorance and being self-absorbed, and standing up for those who need you to stand up for them. Because there's a lot of people who are not blessed with a 2-family home. There's a lot of kids that they couldn't spell gentleman, never mind understand what it was, and it's not their fault. So step up and show up.
Thanks for your time with us today.
Thanks for having me. This has been awesome.
I love your shirt.
I love the 80s.
Yeah. So that is the rad I'm thinking of. The BMX rad.
Yeah, it is the rad.
And have the boys seen the rad? That's the thing.
They have. So my house is wall to wall 80s movies and music.
Really?
Because they're singing about dragons and they're so passionate and everything is really light. And you know what? I don't need to be in a rush to try to play the radio edit to them, because they'll find it on their own.
I just love the 80s too. And that was a great show. I made all my kids watch it.
There's a feeling from then, and it's this, even when it was edgy and risque then, it's so innocent. It's so great. Tame.
Yeah. And it's a little bit of I can do anything.
Totally.
I can be an underdog and I can win.
Story. Absolutely.
Crew goes on to make it happen, doing the backflip over and over.
Just even think about was it Man in Motion, John Parr? It's just like there's this hopeful energy.
Yeah.
And that's what I want. That's what I want the boys to have. Like they will be met with so much failure, and it's good and it's healthy. And, Rory plays basketball, and Saturday they won their first game this season. There is a phrase that I use, which is you have to be the first domino. And falling is scary, but the transference of energy doesn't happen without the fall. And, for him, I said, look, you can't control the other team, but you can hustle. And you're going to be in front of every single ball and every single break, and you just get in front of them. And you're going to fight in every scramble, and I promise you it will change. And you're going to block every shot. And even if you miss, you're just going to be there and you're going to show up. And a couple of weeks ago, it was the coolest thing. first half, he's just kind of like dragging, he's slow, and he's like, oh, we're losing again. But the second half, something changed, and he was on it. And he became the first domino, because then one of his teammates started doing the same thing. And then a second teammate started doing the same thing. And on Saturday, out the gate, he was on everything, and they were on everything, and they won. Now, that's not to say, and then the second game they had overtime because it was tied. And they lost by 3 points because the kid scored a 3-pointer, but so cool to watch. Just this power of like, how scary is it? I can't always stop you from falling, but I can try and be a safe place to land, you know, because the fall is where the learning happens.
Yeah.
So I love it. It's, I've learned so many memories or so many lessons being a dad than I thought was possible. And it's just the beginning. I'm like, wow, I'm a better human being because of these children, because it forces me to take accountability and take stock of where I'm at. Am I speaking to the mother like a gentleman?
Yeah.
You know, if I was to ask my wife how I conducted myself, what would she say? It can't be do as I say, not as I do. It can't, you know, and even though I fall short way more often than I would probably publicly admit, there is a moment of reconciliation, checks and balances, you know, and they're like sponges. Their minds at this age are just so, you know, they
beautiful.
Just, you know, but it's, there's a burden there.
No,
I can't wait until they're older. I can't wait until they're teenagers, because it's easier then. You got to put in the effort now, otherwise they won't be the teenagers that you're expecting.
Yep, and it will be harder regardless if you think it's going to be easier. But when they become teenagers, even with this great base, you know, the teenage years are definitely harder. Not because they're so much different at the world that they're, you know, I was telling Kirk my oldest is just the most happy 16-year-old you've ever met. Like, she's just a really happy person. But she has a couple of friends in the last month and a half that have sent her suicide texts. Like, well, that's heavy. Just new, and that's heavy. And you get your teenagers starting to get stuff that
you just couldn't imagine.
You weren't expecting.
Yeah.
You know? So as they grow up, you know, those principles you talked about that I always, you know, like this center of love, and I have somewhere to fall, as you put it. Mm-hmm. But letting them fall, but catching them.
Yeah.
All those things are going to be huge when they get into like these bigger issues of, you know, boys doing the wrong things, or girls, you know, doing the wrong things, or seeing the wrong thing on their phone or whatever. All the things that are definitely going to come at them.
Yep.
They're going to be able to handle it because of that base that you're talking about.
You know, a neighbor of mine said, told me this 2 years ago, and I think it's, I've shared it dozens of times, he's like, he's got older kids, they're all up and out the house. And he says, Ross, I can't tell you how to parent right, but I can tell you, you get 15 summers with your kids. That's it. Because after that, they want to spend their summers with their friends. So just take that for whatever it's worth, but that is what you have, and the clock is ticking. And
so true.
That's been a scary thought, to go, oh, you're out of school, I'm going to, you know, if I just keep pushing, it's not about the week or 2 week family vacation. It's about the summers. It's the times when they're available and you might not be interested. Are you going to show up for them? Because after that, the moment's passed. Yeah. And that was a punch in the gut for me. I was like, oh crap. Okay. Camping trips it is.
Yeah.
I'm going to do better at the camping trips.
If they love the outdoors, we need to go camping.
Yes.
I would love that.
Yeah, they love it.
Okay.
The wife not so much, but the boys for sure.
We'll do a boys' night.
Thanks,
Ross, thanks for joining us today on the podcast. It's been really, really great. I loved
fun.
all the stuff that we talked about today. Hopefully we've got some good value for our listeners. Thanks for joining us on the Gentleman Project podcast today. I'm Kirk Chug.
And I'm Corey Moore. Be a gentleman.